Good afternoon. We're going to just wait a few seconds while people hop onto the meeting because we know it can take a while to get into the Zoom room. So good afternoon. I'm Michelle Wagner with NAMI New Hampshire, and I work on the first episode Psychosis Early Serious Mental Illness Initiative. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Early Serious Mental Illness and Homelessness, Realities, Resources, and Hope. This presentation is being recorded and you'll be able to find it on the education page of onwardnh.org. There's a short evaluation we're asking folks to complete after today's presentation. You'll also receive a follow-up email with links to both the survey and the recording. This is a Zoom webinar. That means your camera and microphone are off. The Q&A feature is working, however, so please enter any questions you have there. My colleague, Emily Huff, and I will work to get your questions answered as best we can. With us today are 4 people who can help us discuss today's topic, which is of grave concern to many of us, the experience of being unhoused in New Hampshire and how that relates to early serious mental illness. We have with us co-directors of the New Hampshire Youth Success Project, Khadijah Harris and Ariel Hayes. We also have Mandy Lancaster, who works with Waypoint, and Freeman Toth, who is a homeless street outreach and housing stabilization manager for the Belknap Merrimack Community Action Program. We welcome you all. This afternoon, we're going to name the problem, learn what folks who are with us today are doing to improve conditions for people who are unhoused, and what other organizations around the state are doing. Finally, we're going to discuss solutions, what's needed, and what folks listening in today can personally do to help with the issue. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Mandy to introduce herself. And Emily, if you want to just move to the next slide, that would be great. There we go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mandy Lancaster. I'm a senior program manager with Waypoint's Runaway and Homeless Youth Continuum. At this point in my career, my primary focus is supporting people and programs throughout our continuum at Waypoint. And our continuum supports young people between the ages of 12 and 25 that are experiencing some form of homelessness and or housing instability in multiple geographic regions throughout the state of New Hampshire. I'm so glad I could join you for this chat today. Ariel?
Thank you. Thanks, Mandy.
Hi, my name is Ariel. I use she, her pronouns. I am co-director of the Youth Success Project with Khadijah, who's also here as a presenter. And briefly, what the Youth Success Project is we're a board of young people who have all experienced some form of unaccompanied homelessness while under 25. And unaccompanied just means that we were without a parent or guardian while we were experiencing homelessness. And our board of young people comes together to make sure that lived experience and youth voice is a part of decision making in our state around how to end youth and young adult homelessness. And that when we're doing that, young people are fully engaged in that process. They have the support that they need and the knowledge to really share power with adults at the table, that adults are ready to work with young people and really value their expertise, and that young people are paid for their time and expertise because they really do value that, or they really do deserve that. So I'm passing it on.
Ariel, can I just ask you to describe the quote here, where that derived from?
Yes. So this quote, it was put out by the New Hampshire Coalition to End Homelessness in their yearly report, but we actually shared it with them from some focus groups that we ran with young people in our state almost exactly a year ago, where we brought together young people from all across the state to just hear about what their experiences were and what they thought that adults and providers should know about what it's like to be a young person experiencing homelessness. So this is a direct quote from one of our focus group participants, and it made it into the New Hampshire Coalition's annual report.
Okay, great, thank
with that,
you.
passing it on to Khadijah.
Thanks, Ariel. Hi, my name is Khadijah Harris. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am the co-director of the Youth Success Project with Ariel. today I'm just going to be sharing a little bit of my personal story with you guys later on throughout the webinar. So I hope that provides you guys with a little bit of insight in the work that you all do. So looking forward to that. Thank you.
And we'll pass it on to Freeman. Thank you, Khadijah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Freeman Toth, and I manage the Homeless Street Outreach Program and Housing Stabilization Team for the Belknap Merrimack Community Action Program. Our primary function is to work with those experiencing unsheltered homelessness, meaning people that are living in tents, vehicles, abandoned buildings, and either have trouble accessing resources due to not having shelter, or are those types of resources might be inappropriate, a shelter, for instance, due to other factors that the client might be living through. We have street outreach teams that cover the city of Manchester, in addition to covering all of Belknap and Merrimack County. Our primary focus areas tend to be Concord, Laconia, Franklin, and Manchester.
Thank you, Freeman. Look forward to hearing more from you. And with that, we're going to go back to Mandy. I think we can move to the next slide, Mandy, and have you start talking about the work you do.
Great. So I am going to talk a bit with you all about what Waypoint does and what our portion of that work entails, as well as demystify what is youth and young adult homelessness. So from the Waypoint perspective, youth and young adult homelessness aligns with a system perspective through the Family, Youth and Services Bureau, which is embedded within the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level. And we screen young people in. So there are some definitions that work and define homelessness categorically, literal homelessness, fleeing from abuse, imminent homelessness. But from our perspective, housing instability and homelessness captures young people between the ages of 12 and 25 that don't have a steady and safe place to stay. So a young person can self-determine around safety. We work with young people that are tenting outside, sleeping in cars, that are couch surfing, and that also we work with quite a few young people that might be 17 and on their 18th birthday, they know that they have a move out date or home feels unsafe. We're navigating an interesting time in which the opioid epidemic continues to churn on. We are maybe still immersed in a global pandemic. And generally speaking, you know, what I can say is that young people and families are struggling. And when there's economic stress within family systems, sometimes families also need to split up because survival requires them to do that. So we screen young people in. Waypoint has been working with youth experiencing homelessness and housing instability since the 70s. So I feel proud to be part of a long legacy of supporting young people experiencing risk. Intervention and prevention are important factors, and we do put a lot of resources into preventing and catching young people at risk of homelessness and experiencing housing instability, because a primary driving force is to be not only a safe and supportive adult to help catch young people, but to also avoid chronic homelessness. Research indicates that young people that experience homelessness and interface populations that experience chronic homelessness, it increases their risk exponentially to experience chronic homelessness themselves. And I think it's fair to say that we can do better when we're talking about youth and young adults experiencing housing instability. No young adult chooses to be homeless. They didn't ask for that. I've heard some interesting anecdotes over many years, to include things like, all I did was turn 18. I didn't ask for this. Sometimes parents struggle with mental health and substance use. Sometimes young people have their own emerging mental health issues that present. And that's all very complicated. So I do have some data, and it's Waypoint data. There's valuable data from multiple different sources. I'm going to touch briefly on Waypoint data without going too far down the rabbit hole. And also, so if we could start with slide 1, I'll start with Waypoint data. So we have multiple programs throughout our continuum, as is indicated on this first slide. And then I think this actually might be the second slide.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned, we provide supports to young people between the ages of 12 and 25. Yes, we do support young people that are primarily 14 through 17 in that program. And those young people are generally unaccompanied, living with someone that's not a parent or a guardian. And as you can see here, this is all data from 2022. I'm not going to read all of the data sets, but of the 41 young people that are under 18 during 2022, 45% self-reported having mental health concerns and or a mental health diagnosis. 18 to 24-year-olds during 2022, it's 59%. 59 young people were served in Concord and the Merrimack County region. And then 65% on the Seacoast. There's a larger sample set, if you will, with 251 young people being served in our outreach programs. If we go to the next slide, I think if we look at the rapid rehousing data, we're at 86 and 80% of young people served in the Balance of State and Manchester communities are reporting mental health diagnosis, mental health concerns. The disparity between the data sets is not completely unsurprising. The young people that qualify for rapid rehousing programs are those that are most at risk on the streets. So those are young people that have experienced chronic homelessness, have a disabling condition. Generally, mental health is part of that. And those young people are most at risk of death and exploitation on the streets. And this project was developed to give those young people a pathway out of homelessness and housing instability. I could, without analyzing the data too much, I think what I can say, and you can stop sharing the slides if you will, Emily, thank you. Chapin Hall is also a leading researcher in youth homelessness in the country. If folks aren't familiar with Voices of Youth Count, again, that's through Chapin Hall. They are the leading resource entity that has been closely following and researching not only the rate of youth and young adult homelessness in this country, but the complexities that surround youth homelessness, the experiences that young people have to navigate while they experience homelessness, the risk factors. They put out multiple research policy debriefs that have influenced our work here at Waypoint pretty significantly. And if we're to hold those numbers true, Voices of Youth Count, Chapin Hall, they assert that 1 in 10 young people between the ages of 18 and 25 experience homelessness, and 1 in 30 for minors between 12 and 17. So if we're to hold those numbers true, and compare it to the census in New Hampshire, we would assert that there's around 15,000 young people that experience homelessness and housing instability in the state of New Hampshire. That's compelling in and of itself. And at Waypoint, we serve specific geographic regions. I've given you some data around some numbers of young people that are engaged in formal case management relationships with Waypoint, but we encounter 700 plus young people in our geographic regions annually of young people struggling with housing instability. And I fully expect those numbers to inflate given the economic factors that we're navigating currently. So that's a little bit of the issue. I think we could probably spend a complete hour digging into that more. And I know that Ariel and Freeman have some valuable information as it relates to what this looks like in practice and on the ground. So I'm going to toggle this over to Ariel.
Thank you, Mandy. I think that did a really awesome job kind of setting the stage and highlighting some of the what youth homelessness looks like. It does look different from adult homelessness in a lot of ways. And something important about me that I missed in my introduction is that before stepping into my role with the Youth Success Project, I was a case manager and site supervisor at Waypoint for 2 years. So I do have some direct experience working in a case management capacity with young people experiencing homelessness. I have my own brief experience with homelessness, and I've learned a lot from the young people that I've interacted with in the YSP spaces about some of our needs around youth homelessness. So with that, when I was a case manager at Waypoint, I did work with some young people who were coming into their first experiences with psychosis while experiencing homelessness, which is really scary and tough. And when we think about this population, we're thinking about a population who often has had a lot of trauma while they were predating their experience with homelessness, which can be triggering for all sorts of mental illness, but also for psychosis. And the experience of homelessness itself is really traumatizing. We're talking about young people who are actively experiencing trauma. So that can make that experience with homelessness and getting connected to services, getting supports, getting housing, all that much more difficult. So there's a lot of pieces in this, and I hope Freeman can expand on it, but it's really hard to get young people connected with the services that they need when they are experiencing that chaotic homelessness, don't have a safe and stable place to live. And there's a lot of pieces of that. Sometimes young people are coming from stable, home living environments, but when that experience with psychosis first pops up, that living environment is no longer an option because there may be younger kids in the home. There can be so many factors where the family has to work on protecting themselves. They might have housing but can't maintain it. And then I can talk a little bit more about medication, but I want to give Freeman an opportunity to chip in as well.
Sure. Thank you, Ariel. Well, I guess I'll start with some of the basics and kind of to describe a little bit more about what we're doing at our specific CAP agency. But a couple of the big findings, the bullet points from the point in time data over the last few years, which is a federal count that's done and conducted for all persons staying at shelters and all persons that have no shelter. In 2022, they determined roughly 582,500 people were experiencing homelessness. That's a giant number. That means 6 in 10 or 60 or roughly 60% were staying in sheltered locations, emergency shelters and what have you. And the other 40% on the streets or precarious situations like abandoned buildings, cars, and those types of things. Mental health is almost always, to everyone else's points, as far as I'm concerned, the chicken that came before the egg. There are lots of economic circumstances and factors that go in, like we're nationally in a housing crisis. All these things equal a perfect storm, but the ability or inability to attain and maintain permanent supportive housing or independent housing is monumentally impacted by mental health. I was a homeless college student. My mental health was a huge factor, and it was even more of a factor once I was out there. So, and directly from the mouths of my participants, you know, by the time I get to deal with someone as a homeless street outreach manager, they've already fallen about as far as you can fall. So there's only one direction to go, and that's up. So we help them climb back up to the top of the hill. You know, I'm not somebody who will ever point a finger or shake a stick at my participants and tell them what to do. In fact, that's one of my, I don't know what else to call it other than a sales pitch when I'm trying to convince a participant that it would be good for them to work with our team. I start with things like our help is unconditional. Nothing you could possibly tell me is going to cause me not to assist you. You know, we put a big focus on being trauma informed because, again, if they're working with me, life has not been kind. You know, we are who works with the folks that are living in tents, cars, abandoned buildings. So whatever their situation is, it's important that we help them identify in a client-centered way what will help them move forward. Because what I think does not matter at all. I'm there to give them advice and help them keep motoring forward. So with that being said, we provide connections and resources, and we try to bridge the gap for people to make sure that they don't exist as invisible. And what I mean by that is what often happens is folks may engage with the New Hampshire 211 service. I have a no wrong door policy. Our organization does. We're a regional access point, which means if you are living in the city of Manchester or are anywhere living within, residing within, indoors or out, Belknap or Merrimack counties, 211 would refer you to us, and we will respond. I know it sounds slow, but within a maximum of 3 business days, we respond to all those 211 referrals. I have a team of 3 that does that. We do regularly encampment outreach, which means we work with the folks that are living outside in the tent cities. And we frequent places like drop-in centers, soup kitchens, etc., to make sure that we are in front of those we serve, so that they're not forgotten, and so that they are able to gain access to the resources they identify as being useful. And that's, again, I want to harp on that key, the resources the participant identifies that are useful. They may not know what resource they need, which is, you know, I see our role not much different than that of a salesperson. We exist to recommend things, and to gain agreement where we think it will help a person better themselves or move forward. And that's a big part of that. So, you know, I used to have an expression when I ran sales teams: people buy from people they like, so be likable. It's no different. We have to be trauma informed. We have to be likable. We have to connect and discover with each participant so that we can make a meaningful recommendation. We used to call it earning the right to recommend. As people that perform social work, even though I am not a licensed social worker, we need to be extra hyper aware of what people have gone through. And again, everything should be client centered. That doesn't mean they're always going to get the ideal solution, but it does mean that we're trying to tailor a solution that is likely to have a positive outcome. How'd I do, Ariel?
Yeah, and Freeman, I think that something important that you're mentioning or you're inferring is we don't even always have a solution.
This is correct.
So relationship is of significant priority. And we know that is what is most helpful. Change doesn't happen in a vacuum, and a relational approach is foundational. And we also know that young people have unique developmental needs. So their developmental needs generally posit them somewhere in individuation. So their help-seeking behaviors are maybe steeped in crisis and trauma, or something more typical in which I'm going to go at this alone. So if that, then what? I know that there's a question in the chat that asks if we believe that youth and young adult homelessness is underreported, and I can say unequivocally yes. So the data sets that we have, and I'm slow to share our data at times because I know that it's just the tip of the iceberg and there are countless reasons for that. And I think Khadijah, in sharing her own story, can provide a experience which nods to how and why young people are underrepresented in our service delivery systems and our data sets.
Can I sneak something else
Yes.
in there, building on something earlier that both Freeman and Mandy, you all talked about? There is not a clear pathway out of homelessness for a lot of young people that we're talking about. The systems work for some people. Congregate living situations work for some people. We have a very limited number of housing opportunities for a very large number of people. And a lot of these housing opportunities are relying on the person maybe having a little bit more stability in their life, having external supports, and being able to like jump right into the workforce. But especially when we're talking about young people experiencing psychosis or with severe mental illness, that's not a realistic ask. And then another thing that I want to highlight is the way that geography plays into this too, because a lot of youth and young adults, especially when we're thinking about couch surfing, they're moving from one area of the state to another, just like trying to find a place to be inside and safe, ideally safe, not always, for as long as possible. And when we think about how community mental health centers, which are really the hub for mental health care, especially when we're talking about serious mental illness, are structured, they're by county generally or by geographical area. And as soon as a person moves out of a geographical area, they lose care. And they have to start this process over again. So when I'm thinking about the community mental health areas in my part of the state, and I think this is true everywhere, it's months before they can get care. And then if they move because they don't have another option, they've outstayed their welcome at the place that they're staying, it becomes unsafe, they're starting that way all over again. So that makes it really tough to manage mental health, and it makes it really tough to manage medication too. Because also with serious mental illness, we're talking about some strong medications at times that a PCP is not willing to prescribe. So there's a lot of structural challenges there too, where the system is just not built to serve young people experiencing this level of instability, and needing this level of care. So with that, I'm passing it off to Khadijah. Thanks for letting me interject.
Thank you, Ariel. Yeah, so I'm just going to share a little bit about my personal experiences with mental health and being homeless as a teen. Mental illness is something that I became very, like my family they struggled with mental illnesses their whole lives. And I was exposed to that as a kid, as young as I can remember. It's been something that was very consistent in my family. And a lot of their mental illnesses were undiagnosed. We could tell that there was something wrong, but a lot of my family didn't want to face the facts and do what they had to do to get the help that they needed. So my mother, she struggled with bipolar disorder, among other things, but that was the number one factor that I could see had a really big grip on her, a stronghold on her. And my uncle also struggled with bipolar disorder. And then there was a lot of like anxiety, depression. My father, he was very like emotionally unavailable growing up, and he was an alcoholic. There was substance abuse also in the home. My mother was a heroin IV user, and she passed away in 2018 because of it. But now, so I've learned a lot of things in my life when it comes to mental illnesses. I am now a mother and I take it very seriously. I did end up getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder back in September of 2020. But I'm doing things a lot differently than my parents, especially being a mother. It makes you realize how to take care of yourself, growing up and seeing those things, you don't want that to be projected on your children. So you take it very seriously. I am medicated today. Um, and I do go to a support group religiously and therapy. I do a lot of things that I didn't get the opportunity to really do growing up. When you're a minor and your parents are in charge of everything that you do when it comes to therapy and medications and stuff. I was on and off medication my whole life, and it was never consistent because my parents just didn't take it seriously. I struggled with anxiety for a very, very long time, had very bad panic attacks growing up. Um, and it wasn't until I became of age that I could go to the doctors myself and be like, this is the problem. Um, what can we do to fix it or to help me a little bit? And I'm gonna be 28 this year, and I've been great ever since. Like ever since I started taking medication the right ways, talking to my doctors, being um mindful of how my illnesses affect my family and other people in my life. It's been a journey for sure. So I did, like I said before, I did experience homelessness when I was younger. So my parents, long story short, there was a lot of details in between the story, but long story short, both of my parents ended up getting arrested. DCYF got involved, but didn't do much. They basically said they had to build a history before anything could have been done. At the age of 17, I decided to, once they got arrested and we were like literally home by ourselves, I decided to take matters into my own hands and go live with my other sister who was older, and bring my other sister she's disabled. She has a learning disability, so she can't really be by herself. Um, I decided to take my sister and bring her to my grandmother's house where I knew she'd be able to get the care that she needed because I couldn't provide it to her myself. Um, and from doing that, I decided that like I couldn't stay there because there just wasn't enough room for me. And I didn't have a good relationship with my family at the time, so it just wouldn't have been a good situation all in all. So I was homeless, and that was at the age of 17. And um, it was hard because no one would rent out any place to me because I was a kid. I was 17 years old, and in the state of New Hampshire, you have to be 18 in order to have your first apartment. And so I was couch surfing, bouncing around from place to place for a good year. There were a couple of rooming houses that did take me in, but there was so much drug activity. It just wasn't a safe environment for me to live in. So I did utilize that whenever I could for a little bit of time, but then if it got too bad, I just go sleep in my car or something. Um, there was I have a friend from high school. Her mom did take me in a couple of times, but I did realize that after a while, being undiagnosed with all these mental illnesses, mental health conditions, it was ruining and tarnishing the relationship that I had with her. And that was more important to me. So I decided to just end that, like, because she would always take me in, and I was like, no, like, I value our relationship too much. Like, I can go out on my own and be okay. So that's what I ended up doing. And then when I was, oh my goodness, 18 or 19, one of the two, I utilized services from Waypoint, and I did go to their transitional living program. And I was there for a year and a half. I am a success story from them. I was able to accomplish a lot of things. Um, I was in school, I was in college, I was going to college online. I ended up getting my associate's degree in addiction counseling because I really wanted to learn um, all the things addiction because it ran in my family. And I was so young at the time when I was exposed to it. I wasn't really knowledgeable of it. And I also wanted to have a relationship with my mother. And the only way I could have a relationship with her is if I took the time to really learn and study and understand what addiction was and how it affects the brain. So I went to school for it. And then I made a career out of it. I was able to be on good terms with my mother before she passed away, which was the most important thing to me. Um, but I ended up graduating from my associate's degree while I was in the transitional living program. I was able to go to an internship. I was able to work. I was able to save money, and just really focus on the things I needed to do to get my life back in order. Which was, I wouldn't ask for anything more. Like that was just, it was so important for me to have like a bed of my own, like a place of my own. I was a little resistant going into it because if you, once you've been on your own for so long, the last thing you want to do is share space with other people you don't know. Follow rules. I didn't want to follow any rules. So that was a change, but my roommates were wonderful, wonderful people. We still get along and talk to each other till this day. The transitional living program really changed all of our lives, especially mine. So when I had my daughter, you know, I moved into this house that I'm in right now. I've been here for 5 years, and that's the longest I've had a place of my own. Is that I never could have said that. I was bouncing around from place to place for so long. I didn't have a place to really call my own. And it took me 3 years to really decorate and make it my own because I thought I was going to go somewhere. I was like, I'm not going to stay here long, so I don't need to decorate and make it my own. But I just bought a couch that I've been wanting for a while, a new couch. And I was like, you know what? I deserve this couch. I'm going to get this couch. And I got the couch. So, and it's little things like that that make a difference. And I'm very mindful of how I act around my daughter. I'm very mindful of the things that she's exposed to. I'm very cautious in that sense. And I watch her too, just to see, because I know bipolar disorder can be passed down genetically. And I watch for signs and signals through her. She's 4, so she's still kind of young. I didn't start showing symptoms until I was in my teens, like 15, 16. I don't really know the statistics around that, but how early and young you can see it. But I do watch out for her, and you know, I hold myself accountable for my actions when I do have slip ups. You know, the one thing about me is that it showed a lot through anger and aggression because my parents were very angry and aggressive. And it took me until I was like 21, 22 to see, like, to learn that like that is not how you're supposed to act, and that's not how you're supposed to present yourself, and you're supposed to talk about your problems and hold yourself accountable when you make mistakes. So when I do have slip ups, you know, parenting, it can be rough. I do apologize to her and I make her, you know, I talk to her about what was wrong, and, you know, but I'm still learning. And it's just a journey altogether. But I think that's all I got.
It's amazing. Lots of hearts going up for your story. And I think about, we were talking about breaking the cycle, right? So if you grow up with parents who are unstable, who are unhoused, then those kids can end up being unhoused. It goes on. And your story is so important for showing us how that pattern gets broken. And so I'd like to turn back to your colleagues and find out if they have anything they want to share or add. They all know your story, but hearing it again, what they might want our viewers to know and hear.
I think you're your own success story, and you've done so much. And something that I'm gleaning, and I think I have takeaways each time I hear you speak, is that young adults need options that are developmentally appropriate, because under the best circumstances, young people make mistakes, and they need safe spaces and multiple pathways out of homelessness and towards recovery and treatment and care, when they're grappling with both mental health factors and homelessness, to be in safe relationship with programs and people and spaces that are safe and allow for mistakes and welcome them as opportunities for growth and learning. So I see a question in the chat. If, you know, we had a magic wand and could, you know, elicit extra funding to help support and alleviate youth and adult homelessness. I know Ariel and Khadijah can really speak to this. There is money, like additional funding coming into the state through YHDP funding. We know that that's not enough. There have been improvements in our system of care. There still exist incredible gaps. And unequivocally, we need multiple options so that when a young person experiences housing instability and homelessness, there are options for them that best meet their needs so that their experience with homelessness is is brief and reoccurring and provides the support that meets their need. So I don't know, Ariel and Khadijah, if you would say more about that, Freeman.
I wanted to highlight one other thing from what Khadijah shared too. And we've talked about this before, Mandy, but actually this is into what you shared too, Freeman. But this hustle of like, when you approach a young person experiencing homelessness, like they've had a lot of negative experiences in a lot of situations with service providers. Someone in the chat asked about DCYF involvement. And off the top of my head, I think it's about 30% of young people experiencing homelessness, 33%, have had some sort of DCYF involvement. And sometimes there's a lot of autonomy that isn't present in that space. Young people don't feel like they had control over their lives or their situation because they usually didn't. So there's a lot of rebuilding that trust and healing and consistently showing up for young people. Like Khadijah wasn't immediately like, yes, TLP, I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna be successful and this is gonna work for me. It took consistent relationship building and showing up even when the young person says to F off or like whatever it is, consistently showing that you're a safe person who isn't trying to get anything from them, because a lot of young people haven't had those positive in relationships yet. Khadijah, were you going to say something off that?
Yeah, I was just going to say my one thing I didn't share was the case manager that I had while I was in the transitional living program. We're still friends to this day, but that girl is persistent. Like for 2 years, I turned down going to the transitional living program. And every time she saw me, she saw me, like she's seen me for who I was. She knew that I was going to be successful. And she knew that this is exactly what I needed to be successful. And once I took advantage of it, like I just went off. Like it was the greatest experience. Like I couldn't have asked for a better experience or a better case manager to have.
Persistence. So relationships, building relationships, safety, caring, persistence.
Yeah. And why would a young person trust someone that they just met? Like we have to earn trust.
Mm-hmm.
Freeman, were you gonna say something on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it goes back to that, you have to have the credibility in order to approach someone. It can be done a few ways. You can establish common ground. There's more than one way to gain agreement. But to answer, I kind of just want to loop back to the question that Mandy had started with in the Q&A, because I saw that one as well. And I guess I would take a slightly different spin on it and say that there is no wand, and that organizations like ours don't necessarily get to ask per se for what they want. They're told what's available and then have to scramble to see if they can get to the trough in time, and if HUD will see fit to bestow these resources upon us. We're talking grant turnaround times of 1 to 2 weeks sometimes we are hit with. These are not grant turnaround times to buy new desks. These are grants so that we can continue to exist. So I guess if I were to ask for one thing, it would be that the services that we are collaboratively, as a group of service providers should not have to beg for their existence. Caps are kind of odd, and this is going to seem like a tangent, but Community Action Program Partnership is a nationwide partnership. We were formed in 1964 by Lyndon B. Johnson when he declared a war on poverty. So we fight poverty in all its forms. When people ask me what I think about homelessness, I say it's a symptom of poverty. What we are seeing right now societally, whether it be youth individuals or other individuals, because I don't care if you're 24, 42, or 82, if you had to sleep in your vehicle last night or in a tent, that's unacceptable. So again, we need to stop telling people what to do and asking them what they need. Help must be unconditional. The communities, it's not just a federal solution. The communities themselves need to provide direct, concrete resources. I'll give you an example. With the exception of very recent turn of events, cannot think of a city that owns and operates a shelter. And these things are starting to happen very recently in some communities throughout the state. But usually organizations like, I'll throw out our brother or sister organization, whichever you like to refer to it, TCAP, Tri-County Community Action. They've run shelters in the past. My good friends over at the Concord Coalition to End Homelessness run a cold weather shelter. The Salvation Army offers shelter solutions. But very few of these shelters are owned or operated by the state or the communities themselves. And that's truly a piece of ownership that we need to see approached, because it can't just be third-party charities and organizations. CAPS are in a very odd position because we're federally mandated to exist, but we're not part of the government. We enjoy very few of the privileges of being a government organization, but all of the drawbacks of being a third-party charity, because again, we fight for every red cent that we use to assist. So I hope that kind of looped back in. But
And there
really,
are models out there that exist in which surrounding states, there are municipalities that are in the work and operating shelters. There are state DHHS systems that are contributing to runaway and homeless youth work. And to your point, Freeman, when the funding is available from a youth and young adult perspective, federal funding, state funding, we're trying to make it developmentally appropriate, right? And offer the supports that meet the need. And we are wrestling for scant resources and competing against one another. And so we have this situation where a youth provider could be competing with another youth provider for a limited resource. So it's a tough situation for sure. And there are models of care and good examples from some of our folks doing similar work in neighboring states. And I am encouraged by what is coming out of the YHDP work, the Youth HUD demonstration projects.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of really unique and forward thinking, especially out of that project, because we've got some, please take this as a compliment, some young blood, relighting the torch, if it will. And I guess, my last point to the no wand comment would be that help really has to be unconditional. I have to keep going back to that, whether it is, because I know this is largely about mental health and how it intersects with what we do. People who go into treatment for substance misuse are going to have emotional outbursts. People that are youths experiencing homelessness are going to do things like break windows. They are going to do things like tell their case manager to drop dead, or maybe that finger that's in the middle of your hand might get floated around. And there are lots of emotional events that people who are experiencing these very extreme hardships go through, and we just need to ensure that there's never an exit to the street. That would be the one thing, if I had to beg for, there should always be a downstream option. Exit to a street, whether they're coming from a hospital, a TLP, which means transitional living program, a standardized apartment, or even from the couch hopping situation, because yes, youth homelessness is especially underreported because they're able to cultivate sympathy a lot easier than maybe the middle-aged population, that 25 to, let's say, 59 age bracket. People that are classified as elderly or youth are much easier able to cultivate sympathy with, whether it be a welfare officer or a person to let them have a warm place to stay. But I would also say that that also puts especially youths at extreme risk when they're couch hopping, because again, people are often taken advantage of for simple things like a place to stay. So the help has to be unconditional, and we can never exit people to the street, because if we do, the trauma will become insurmountable.
And young people often don't have the same, this is their first time experiencing homelessness, and they don't have the same survival skills built up that maybe folks experiencing chronic homelessness or older folks might have. Michelle, were you gonna ask something?
I want to loop back to Freeman saying that homelessness is a symptom of poverty. And so when I think of poverty, I think of financial resources. But as a mother who has 2 sons who experienced early serious mental illness, they ended up homeless, and it was a poverty of resources, right? And a poverty of education. I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't have support. We were desperate. We were concerned that the whole family was going to go down if we didn't get them away from the home situation. And it was a tough love sort of attempt as well, right? We didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to go. So I think, and when we met before this webinar last week, and I was saying to Mandy, I was a mother who made that choice to push my children into homelessness. Ooh, here come tears. One of the toughest choices I've ever made in my life, right? Could be the toughest. And just understanding that side of it, it isn't always parents who are having their own mental health issues and just can't take care of their kids. I didn't know where to go.
And I think a message that I have for providers, and one that I shared with you, Michelle, I think it's too easy to pass judgment on parents, and that when a young person is in acute crisis and grappling with pretty significant symptoms related to mental health, there are often safety concerns, or there can be. And it would be too easy to shame the parents, and that they are deserving of our grace and kindness and compassion as well. And when we do that, there creates an opportunity for some sort of support from the family system as they can, and like what's safe and appropriate to provide support to the young person, even if they're not in the home. So your story is like many stories, and Ariel, I know that we can collectively point to a few together in which there isn't a solution. So education and resources may have shortened or changed the relationship to housing instability or homelessness for your children, but it may not have avoided it, because there aren't multiple pathways. And that's real unfortunate. Yeah.
Agreed.
Hey, I was hoping to chime in on a question I saw in the chat here, because I'm feeling pretty passionate about it. This is a person that said they were homeless at 20, which resonates a little bit. And they're basically asking how can they help to get more targeted assistance. I guess I would say continue being you, continue being kind. We all know the person at Dunks who serves us coffee every morning, or at least I hope you do, you know their name, because you see them every day. When you see a person who's clearly unsheltered experiencing homelessness, obviously, to the extent you feel safe communicating, I would say that I've been out in the woods for 4 years working with people since 2019. And very rarely have I ever felt unsafe with my participants. I never encourage anybody who isn't outreach to ever do outreach. You should not. You should leave that to us, because it only takes one of you getting hurt for all of us not to be able to do our jobs anymore. But with that being said, keep being kind. Learn these folks' names. When they ask for resources of of a hard need variety, whether it be a couple of dollars or whatever. You make your own determination as to whether you feel comfortable with that. I'm never the person that's going to tell you not to give them $5. But I would tell you, you kind of hit the nail on the head with getting them connected with things like 211 for more targeted assistance. I know the feedback of my participants is not always positive when it comes to things like 211, but they're an amazing service. It's 12 individuals last I checked taking all the 211 calls for the entire state. That's whether it was a COVID call or a call about substance misuse or a call about experiencing homelessness, or even connecting to the VITA tax sites, the volunteer income tax assistance service that we host here at CAP, in partnership with Granite UW. But the fact of the matter is helping them connect with resources and providing information, but most importantly, you can have an indirect impact. And I think all of us can. When we hear someone say the words homelessness is a choice, or you hear someone say they're just survivalists, tell them they're wrong. It's like when you've got the racist uncle. You can't just be like, oh, that's just Uncle Billy Bob. I actually do have a relative named Billy Bob. But the thing is you have to tell them they're wrong. You have to tell them it's not a choice. You have to tell them there's a barrage of resources that or barriers rather that get in the way in between you and those resources. Something as simple as the fact that you have to fight with the free phone people to get those things turned on and keep them on. Your things are constantly getting wet, and everything you own and love is getting washed away with the weather. New England is one of the most unforgiving climates in the country. There are so many barriers. There is often no shelter, despite what they would have us believe, even though new shelters are being opened. But even if they did have space, they may not be appropriate. If the person that raped you was staying at the shelter, would you go? The answer is most certainly not. If you are 3 weeks sober and you are just clinging on to things, would you go to a place where people were still in active use, howling at the moon, so to speak? You would not, because you are clinging to your newly found sobriety. So I would say, be the voice of reason, be educated on the facts of homelessness, and educate your peers, because you don't have to have a direct impact on those people living in the encampment near you. You can simply better support the people working with them in the community by educating your fellow community members and showing up at zoning and planning meetings, etc.
Also, something that I hear a lot is reference to the welfare law in New Hampshire as kind of like this, oh, well, they have options. It's like the save all be all. The city is required to provide an option for a person experiencing housing instability or homelessness. But that's not always a realistic option for a lot of folks. Welfare can be really helpful when we're talking about families or like preventing homelessness before it occurs. But a lot of times when single people or couples go in to get assistance, the conversation then becomes, where is a shelter bed open in the state? And that can be across the state. It's usually across the state. It can mean splitting up a couple who like that is the only trusted safe person in their life at that point. It means sending them away from all their support networks, all their community. So just because I'm experiencing homelessness in Dover, New Hampshire, and there's a shelter bed in Manchester does not mean that that is a realistic option for me. That can make it a lot less safe for me. So welfare has an important role and they can be helpful, but this is oftentimes not a helpful option for people who don't have kids. Sometimes they can pay for a hotel and do a little bit more when there's kids involved, but they generally won't do that for couples and single adults.
Well, and just, I hate to pipe in again, and I'm so sorry, but I work with so many welfare officers throughout the state, and there are so many exceptional ones. Something I just feel like folks have to know, most welfare officers are part-time. A lot of cases in especially the smaller communities, it's someone who's only at work 2 maybe 3 days a week if you're lucky, or they're just on call and are not in the office regularly at all. When you're lucky enough to be in an epicenter of civilization, a Portsmouth, a Dover, a Manchester, a Nashua, a Concord, or of the like, you're going to get a very skilled welfare officer, and all the other ones are usually very caring. But again, each town has different guidelines. What a person may be eligible for in one community is completely different in another community. Most states across the nation, welfare is handled at a county or state level. New Hampshire is one of the only states in the contiguous United States that allows, and I stress allows, welfare to be handled by the city itself, and it is not level funded. So, one city may have less money to deal with that problem than another city, just like we often think about with education when we think about our children. It's a very similar situation, and it creates a lot of barriers. Again, if every resource you knew, if the fact that you know how to walk from one side of town to the other, if you lived out in Portsmouth, but you have no clue how to navigate Manchester, that gets very dangerous. Not just scary, but it gets dangerous because you don't know where not to go. So I really have to bolster Ariel's comments with it's not a good idea to ship a person wherever the bed is. We need to make sure that there are enough beds per capita and that they are developmentally appropriate beds. The other thing is if you had a pet, would you leave it?
When
One of
I
the
was
largest barriers I see.
homelessness, I was in my car with my dog because there was not a shelter or a place for me to go to. Yeah, I
Correct.
was
And
not
there
gonna
is
leave
no
her.
place for people with animals, period.
Mhm.
And it does not matter if it's a service animal. An ESA letter might as well be, forgive the expression, but toilet paper. Because people don't want to deal with the animal. I get it. It presents a lot of concerns for a shelter. If I was running a shelter, I wouldn't want to deal with a participant with an animal. But it doesn't
ESA,
change the fact that they're
emotional support animal.
correct. But it doesn't change the fact that it's a challenge and we need to present a solution for it. Again, less telling the clients what to do and more asking them what they need.
This is a good segue into the question about how do you work with community mental health centers for transient youth who need the consistency in care? Is there any collaboration with community
There
mental health
is.
centers? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I have a few anecdotes to share. So this isn't necessarily formalized relationships and agreements that are happening in the Seacoast Tri-City region. But there are things happening that are extremely helpful. So if there are any participants that work in a mental health center, I would encourage you to check in with your leadership and administration and see if there's room to work in this way. So young people experiencing acute mental health issues, struggling with homelessness, scheduling appointments is difficult for a myriad of reasons. If you have a phone, which is unlikely, trying to connect to a provider, leave a message, call backs. I could go on and on about how difficult that can be. So we have 2 informal agreements with mental health centers over here in which staff have agreed to schedule intake appointments with Waypoint staff. So we're cutting out the need for the young person to make the phone call, receive the call back, schedule the appointment. This is all happening buy-in from the young people. We're not doing anything without their express consent and permission. And we're scheduling those intake appointments. Some centers require a person to wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning to call for an intake. And if there are no intakes available, you have to try again at 8 o'clock the next day when intake appointments are being scheduled. And that does not work for young people experiencing homelessness and struggling with mental health issues. That agreement in and of itself extends an olive branch to so many young people that otherwise would not connect. Allow us to figure out the logistics and the transportation, just the agreement and the willingness to collaborate with providers and skip a few hoops is quite impactful. I've also seen and worked with staff in emergency departments and other institutions in which they've refused to discharge a young person into literal homelessness until there is an appropriate plan of care. And that can also be hugely impactful and helpful. It takes a lot for a young person to get to an emergency room, to commit to staying, to entering into treatment, but to exit out into literal homelessness is like asking the young person to start all over again. So when we have professionals in the community, helper professionals that are willing to coordinate and collaborate with us so that we can partner with the young person, partner with staff in that health center to develop a plan that's safe and supportive, I've seen that change lives. And I'm not, that's not hyperbole, you know? It is, it's of huge benefit. So that, so without radically changing systems, those are ways that people can humanize this issue and maybe go just the extra step and picking up the phone and connecting with a provider to support young people. That's my soapbox. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
beautiful. Couple of things I want to make sure we touch on because we are coming close to time. I knew we'd run out. We all knew we'd run out. One of them is the LGBTQIA plus population. So could you speak to whether or not those who are in that community are facing increased risk of becoming housing insecure and or any specific resources to support these folks? It's a great question.
I can start out and then I know Mandy has things to say about this too. LGBTQ youth are at a higher risk of homelessness compared to their straight cisgender peers. And that Mandy was talking about the Chapin Hill data earlier, and that is one of the major areas that they highlight. I believe I don't know off the top of my head, but I want to say it's about 150% higher risk of homelessness. And another piece of that is that once youth and young adults who are LGBTQ are experiencing homelessness, they tend to be at a higher vulnerability or a higher risk as well. They're more likely to face be in dangerous living situations, face assault, sexual assault, can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but there's both higher risk and there's higher vulnerability once experiencing homelessness. You want to go, Mandy?
So LGBTQ plus youth are absolutely overrepresented in homeless service systems and are, to Ariel's point, 67% experience some sort of physical harm in homelessness. So assaults occurring while homeless. So it can be a very dangerous situation. At Waypoint, we go to great lengths to integrate a perspective into the work that is LGBTQ plus affirming. Some ways in which we do that is we affirm a young person's identity and we don't make assumptions. And we, in our TLP homes, for example, we ask them how they identify and then put them where they belong. And that is, we still operate in a binary way in our TLP homes, but if a person is saying that they feel more comfortable on one side of the home or another, we allow them to choose. And we are slowly moving more towards something that is gender inclusive and moving away from the binary. At our transitional living programs, we operate that way in our emergency shelter in Manchester. And then just how we show up in the space. It's about not making assumptions, being person-centered, asking permission, being curious. We have lots of visual cues throughout all of our office space that show LGBTQ plus pride, indicate that we support BIPOC youth who are also overrepresented in homeless service delivery systems. And we have queer staff, and that's something that we generally share pretty openly with young people, because there's so much stigma around it. And so our hope is to live openly and freely, so that other young people can feel safe and secure in our programs. And then we coordinate with other LGBTQ plus service systems as needed, health systems and pro-social and peer groups, so that we can, make those referrals and build relationships and safety between entities. So,
And the question is, are transgender youth more at risk of harm and housing job discrimination? And yes,
yeah.
absolutely, that is for sure. We're coming to the end here. We have just a few minutes, and I do want to talk about hope and what people can do. And you all have touched on that during our time together. But people want to walk away from here being able to take a step and know what they should be supporting around the state. So can we just go through the four of you and have you each give folks ideas? And I know, Freeman, you did already talk on that, but how are we going to leave folks with hope here?
All right. I can't not bolster Mandy's last point. LGBTQ, especially trans kids, are at way more risk for harm out there. You wouldn't believe the stuff they experience. So with that being said, check out who the basic organizations are. You've seen some of us today, but do your research. Google us, figure out who's actually doing work with participants out in the field and who's just got a business card. There's a lot of that out there. There are many, many programs, but I guess what I would say is, reach out to us. We're all happy to, I'm happy speaking for myself, but I see some nods. We're all happy to do participant education, community member education. If somebody wants to have a cup of tea with me, provided schedule allows, I will do that, because it's all about educating community members, because they're the ones that will help us turn the tide. So please reach out to us directly to become directly informed, I guess is the message I would leave you with. And shamelessly, I would say at App Street Outreach on Facebook, check out the wish list. We've had people reach out to us and say, hey, I bought all this stuff and I really want to help you. And I would say, that's really cool. But if you're going to buy stuff, buy it from our wish list, because it ensures equity. Everybody should be treated the same and be given the same opportunity. And to me, that comes right down to ensuring that the blanket they receive is safe and won't catch on fire.
I want to make a plug here, or use my time to really talk about how important youth voice and lived experience is in this. And I say youth voice because that's what the Youth Success Project does, but really making sure that people with lived experience of every age and every experience with homelessness do have an actual say in the work that's being done. Mandy and Freeman both referenced YHGP earlier, the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program grant, which takes a little bit to explain, so I won't jump into that right now. But this project has really required youth and young adults from the Youth Success Project to be involved in every stage of developing a plan to end youth homelessness. We've reviewed job descriptions for new programs funded through this grant, interviewed applicants, we're training applicants. So really making sure that we're in youth and young adults who get this, who know what's going to work, who know what's not going to work, are involved in every step of the process at a big macro level, but also in talking to individual programs about how they work with young people, approach substance use, build relationships. Because youth and young adults, like we didn't choose to experience homelessness, which was already said, but like we really are the experts in it. We've lived it, we've been on that side, and we have to be a part of decision making.
Thank you, Ariel. Khadijah or Mandy?
I can go. I don't know. I sat on this question a little bit, which is kind of odd to me because like there's been a lot of times in my life where I felt hopeless. So I figured this would be easier to identify. But I don't know, just for me, going off of like going back a little bit to like when I was sharing my story, like there was a lot of key factors in my story that really helped me get out of homelessness. And I think that like being a person of color and living in New Hampshire, which is a predominantly white state, um, I needed that support, that extra support from like my service providers that I worked with. So if you are a service provider here and you do deal with people who are people of color and they're in the BIPOC community, like it's really important to check in on them and just see how they're doing, how they're feeling, what you can do to make them feel better if something's going wrong. I didn't speak up enough with my experience, but because I was very angry. But if I had somebody who would have came to me and been like, how are you? Like, really, how are you doing? That would have made all the difference in the world. So I want to speak to my community for this question a little bit and just, yeah, make that be known.
Thank you, Khadijah. Mandy, final words.
Final words, consider your spheres of influence, consider your interests and your resources and how you can leverage those, which are different for all of us. And at the end of the day, reflect on how can you be a safe and supportive adult for young people in your community that might be struggling with homelessness and mental health symptoms. One adult can change the trajectory of a young person's life. I mean, that's no that's true. It holds true in the research. So just to bring a human element to this, be kind and be generous in all the ways that you can.
Oh, beautiful. With that, I would like to thank you all so very much for being with us this afternoon, panel who joined us and also the attendees. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation form. There is the link in the chat. After you fill it out, you will get a certificate of attendance. Just a reminder, a recording of today's discussion will be posted on the education page of onwardnh.org, and you're going to get an email in the next couple of days, which has a link for the website and the evaluation. For any comments, please reach out to me. Email addresses did go into the chat. I hope my panelists are okay with that. And we do look forward to seeing folks who can join us next month. We're going to get an update on New Hampshire's Rapid Response Access Point 988. So until then, thank you once again to our wonderful panel and be well. Take care.